Hello, 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 everyone. Happy Monday, and welcome to FPP Live, a time I connect with you every Monday, 7 p.m. EST, where we connect all things faith with purpose and profit. Beyond excited to be here with you week after week. So, those of you that are here with me, you know what I'm getting ready to say. Come on in, tell me name and where you're from. Don't come into my virtual room and not illy speak. So I'm excited to continue a five-part series that we started weeks ago, and the series is called "Dominate in Your Lane." The insight you need to have a strong foundation in your business. If you want to have a profitable business, so many people don't realize that you've got to dominate in your lane, and that domination is the strong foundation. And if you don't realize what I'm talking about your purpose. So many people overlook it, think they have it clear, and they don't. And so I dug deep into that in week one. Week two, our conversation was you must be savage in your business. And that is a play on I'm a Savage, Megan the Stallion's song, but I did it in a whole different purpose focused way. But you've really got to be savage in your business, unstoppable. You've got to be unapologetic, clear and focused, and stop shifting with the wind. I went deep into that in week two. And then in week three, I talked about, which was last week, you got to stop treating your business like a booty call, your purpose focused business like a booty call. You've got to be fully committed to it. So if you missed any of those parts of part one, two, or three, I want to encourage you to go and listen to our podcast. Those of you that don't know, we do a weekly wrap up on Fridays, and that is our podcast. That's fpppodcast.com, so that you can get the full insight and full steps I walk you through each week. Because what I teach, everything builds on the next, and you do need all five of these parts in this series if you're going to have a profitable business, which starts with you dominating in your lane. So now we're in week four. Week four, or part four in this series, and our conversation today is you've got to leverage first so you can scale. You've got to leverage first so you can scale. I hear so many people talking about they want to leverage so they can scale, but what they don't realize is they haven't fully leveraged their brilliance, their purpose. And that's the conversation we're having today. So listen, there's a Bible verse that says, Proverbs 18:16, that says, a man's gift makes room for him or her, because I see ladies in the house today, and brings him before great men. But I need you to get this. But are you making room to leverage your gift? Because listen, God, I said this in another episode, God can't give you a big blessing through a small window. And some of you are looking at your gift so small, so singular, that when God is trying to multiply, which by the way is my conversation for the final week, that's the whole scale. Listen, scale means to reach the highest point of, to rise in a graduated series. I'm going to talk about that in part five. But if you're going to multiply your gift, and I believe I read that by verse Genesis 1:28, week one or week two, which is my mandate to teach from, which is God has called all of us to be fruitful, to multiply, and have dominion. And that's what I'm teaching from anytime I'm with you. So if you're going to be fruitful with your gift, you got to leverage it fully. Leverage means producing good results. How do you produce anything if you haven't fully leveraged it? And I see so many people that live in mediocre and good enough, and they settle in their business. But I need you to understand, when you put the extra with the ordinary is what makes your gift and your business extraordinary. Just imagine that. Put extra, write extra on a piece of paper, then write ordinary. Those two words together make up the word extraordinary. See, that's the difference between an athlete that then wins an Olympic gold medal. Hello, Serena Williams. That's the difference between a young girl that gets raped every day, that then one day becomes Oprah Winfrey. Hello, extra with ordinary. That makes the difference between a little black girl from the south side of Chicago, ordinary. That when she put the extra with it, she became the first black woman first lady of the United States. Hello, Michelle Obama. Are you guys getting my point? Or how about a little girl that practices every day? Every day after school, she starts at 9 years old. She practices day after day after day after day. What were y'all doing at 9? I definitely wasn't practicing with my friends every day after school. I wasn't mm, look, taking my summers and practicing my craft and growing my gift and leveraging my gift day after day after day. I wasn't doing that. See, it's that extra with the ordinary that makes that little girl become Beyonce. So, really, I need you to understand leverage is the key to really go after your abundantly above all. See, God never intends for us to stay where we started. If you've been with me, you've heard me talk about a quote that I borrow from my pastor covering Isaac Petrie. And he says all the time that we grow on levels and we go through stages. And so I ought to talk about the fact that our purpose matriculates. That when we're in school, we know we're going to matriculate through the education system. For those of you that haven't heard me talk about this, we know we got to go through kindergarten and elementary before junior high. We got to go junior high, and some of you went to middle school, same thing, before high school. And then if we're going to go on to college, you can't go to grad school without going to undergrad. You can't get a PhD without getting a master's degree 9 times out of 10. Need I say more? That's matriculation. But the difference between your purpose matriculation process and the education matriculation process is God doesn't tell you every step you've got to take. It's up to you to leverage it. Another great example that, yesterday my husband and I were talking and we were watching a documentary about the Lakers, to be honest with you. And he started talking about this study that he read in a book that he started sharing with his team. And so I looked it up and I'm going to read it because I don't want to mess it up. Listen, this is a great example of leveraging. The fate of British cycling changed in one day. Now, let me tell you why this is so significant. At the time, the Great Britain cycling team endured nearly 100 years of mediocrity. Since 1908, British riders had won just one gold medal at the Olympic Games. Now, this was 1908 to 2003, by the way. One day in 2003, everything changed. So from 1908 to 2003, however many years is that? They had only won one Olympic gold medal. In fact, listen, which makes matters worse, in the Tour de France, and we all know if you've heard of cycling, you've heard of the Tour de France, which is the creme de la creme of events in the cycling world. In 110 years, no British, no Brit cyclist had ever won in 110 years. And then listen, other British other British manufacturers refused to sell to the British team because they thought, I don't want people to think that they're losing because of my bike. So they were just looking pretty bad, pretty bad until the day that they hired a new coach. The coach's name and his last name is Browse. I think his first name is Brailsford. Okay. Now, what made him different from other coaches was a strategy that he referred to as the aggregation of marginal gains. Leverage the aggregation of marginal gains, which was the philosophy of searching for a tiny margin of improvement in everything you do. A tiny margin of improvement. Tiny. So imagine, I call this the 10% more factor. So if I just focus on 10% more, listen, if I wanted to jump from here and if I was standing in my driveway all the way to the other end of my driveway, regardless of how big your driveway is, there's no way that you can jump unless you're a long jumper and you're an Olympic hurdler or something like that, that you can jump from one end of your driveway to the other. But if I just jump 10% more and then 10% more and then 10% more, I'll get to the other side of that driveway. Again, this is what made the difference between Beyonce at 9 practicing every day. It's the 10% more principle, or as Brailsford would call it, the aggregation of marginal gains, small improvements every day. And so what happened because they did that? Listen, where's my updates? Okay. So they started making small adjustments. They started finding improvements in overlooked and unexpected areas. Okay. So listen, 5 years after they started to make these improvements, in the 2008 Olympics, they won 60% of the gold medals. 60%. So they went over 100 years with only winning one to winning 60% of the gold medals in one game. 4 years later, in the Tour de France, listen, y'all, they 9 Olympic records. They said 9 Olympic records and 7 world records in the Olympics. But then Bradley Wiggins became the first British cyclist to win the Tour de France. I can go on and on about awards they won the next in 2015 and 16 and 17. And so listen, They went from no ranking to top ranking just by focusing on how do I leverage a little bit more of my gift. Okay. So, how does this happen? I want to share a story from the Bible that I absolutely love. It's what happens when you use what you already have. You truly leverage what you already have. And it's Elijah and the widow's oil. This is in 2 Kings 4 1 through 7. And this is going to teach us, as I'm going to walk you through in a few minutes, the 8 steps to leverage your gifts and actually go after 10% more. But I want to read the story of the widow who's going to shine a light on our journey. Okay, again, it's 2 Kings 4 1 through 7. A certain women of the wives of the sons of the prophet cried out to Elisha, saying, your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that your servant feared the Lord. And the creditors are coming to take my 2 sons to be his slaves. Now, apparently, when you had debt back then, they could take your kids as repayment for the debt. So, verse 2, Elisha said to her, what shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house? And she said, your maid servant has nothing in the house but a jar of oil. Then he said, go borrow vessels from everywhere, from all your neighbors, empty vessels. Do not gather, just a few. And when you have come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons. Shut the door behind you and your sons. Then pour into all those vessels and set aside the full ones. So she went from him and shut the door behind her, and her sons who brought the vessels to her, she poured it out. Now it came to pass, when the vessels were full, that she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, there is not another vessel. So the oil ceased. Then she came and told the man of God, and Elisha said to her, go sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons live on the rest. Now I'm going to walk you through the 8 steps, or the 8 things you really got to do if you're going to leverage your gift. This is before you can scale. This is before you can say, how I want to make more revenue. Even if you want to add systems in your business, you've got to leverage your gift and talents, your brilliance, your purpose first. Okay. You ready? And I'm going to walk back through this Bible verse and tell you where this is reference to this. So, number one, you've got to do something you've never done. Number one. You know what I find so many people doing is, if you keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result, isn't that the definition of insanity? Those of you that have heard my story of failing in my business for 17 years, the reason I failed for 17 years is I kept doing the same thing over and over. I just kept adding extra hours to it, or adding an extra day, but it was the same thing. If you want something you've never had, you've got to do something you've never had, which means you're going to be uncomfortable. I think so many people want to stay in comfort, or they quit when it gets hard. And it's getting hard because you've never done it before. And so you might make a mistake. The word mistake is, think about it this way, a mistake, M-I-S, take, T-A-K-E. So that means that you just mistaked it that time. So if you do it again, you learn the lesson and you do it the right way the second time. But you quit. And the reason 9 times out of 10 you make a mistake is because it's different. So you may not know what you're doing, and that's okay. Learn the lesson and move forward. Mm-hmm. So you got to push past where you are, push past what you even already know. So when Elisha said to her, first of all, she said, and I said this in a previous episode, I think it was in episode 2, your maid servant has nothing in her house but. So she's overlooking what she has already. Because she said, I have nothing but. So in other words, she has something, but she's overlooking it. And because she's got to do something different with what she has is why she's overlooking it. Okay. I often say this quote, the tools you've used on this level are not sufficient for your next. And because you can't see from inside the jar called you'll never see how you can activate it. So important that you've got to do something different if you want something different. So that's number one. Now, the other thing I think is, I'm going to jump back and forth in this story, by the way. He said to her, let me see. And when you have come in, this is verse 4, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons, then pour it. Now, why do you think he said shut the door behind you and your sons? So number 2 is you got to do an environment check. Okay. You know, there's a quote that says you are the sum of the 5 people closest to you. But when God is doing something different in your life and you're having to make a pivot to do it, now think about what a pivot is. It means one foot might be where you are right now, right? If I had a ball in my hand, let's say this is a ball. This is my lip gloss, but it looks like a ball. I'm playing basketball and I have a ball in my hand. A pivot turn means I can't move one foot while I'm turning the other one. to make a shot or do a pass. If I move the other foot, they call that traveling, those of you that know sports. So a pivot means your one foot may be presently where you are, and God might be calling you to move. So for me, my first career was in the entertainment industry. When God started calling me to do this thing, and I started talking to my friends about it, they started saying, "Girl, are you crazy?" And I felt crazy. So I realized I had to stop talking to them, not because they weren't supportive, not because they didn't love me, but if I didn't understand what I was doing, why would I expect anybody else to understand? And what happens is when people start to second guess what you're doing, it makes you start to second guess what you're doing. So why I believe Elisha told the woman, shut your door, is so no one can tell you, girl, have you lost your mind? There ain't no oil in there. You got this much oil. You think you're gonna pour that oil and it's gonna fill the jar? Yeah, you're crazy. And she probably felt crazy too. So you've got to realize that you've got to do an environment check and realize who is around you and are they pouring into you? Are they going to get what you're doing? Because sometimes it's nobody else's business but you and God. The other thing you got to do is be careful who you're talking to. I heard people that I meet people all the time when I start coaching them. We're having our first coaching call, and they start telling me the advice that their friends gave them that don't have a business, or your friend might have a business but they don't have a successful, profitable business. Why are you listening to that group of people give you advice about your business when they don't have a successful business themselves, or they may have a business that's altogether different than the business you're trying to start? So you got to be mindful of who's pouring into you and shut your door. Shut your door, especially if God is pouring into you and giving you insight and telling you how to maneuver your gift. Sometimes you might think you're crazy. I know I did. I know I did. Which moves us to number three. That's when you got to increase your faith. Now, one of my favorite Bible verses, I have so many. Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. See, if you're doing something you've never done before, part of the reason why I always say your comfort and your conviction can never coexist is going to be uncomfortable when you're doing something you've never done before. I believe God puts us in those situations, so we have to trust Him. Otherwise, we would think we were doing it in our own merit, and we're not. So faith comes when you're having to do something outside of your comfort zone, something outside of what you already know, something that makes you use your gifts and talents in a different way. Hello, purpose matriculation. So when God started calling me out of the entertainment industry, and I didn't understand why, because I loved it. I didn't realize that what he was calling me to do was still producing and casting, which is what I do here in my business. As I put you in the right role in your business, and my team and I produce all your programming. So I didn't understand that I was using the same gift, but God was matriculating it into another arena. But I had to get out of my comfort zone. Another example of this is Abraham. Now, the thing I think is so interesting is a number of names that get changed in the Bible. When God calls people, I wrote a list of them down here. When God changes people's names, it's because they moved into a different arena. So Abraham's name was Abram. I'm gonna read a couple Bible verses from about him in a second. But even Sarah was Sarai. Jacob, his name became Israel. Saul became Paul. Mara became Naomi. I can go on and on. The Bible goes on and about names got changed because they did a pivot from where they were into their next level. They leveraged their gifts at their next level into a new arena that God was pulling them into. Okay. And listen, there's a whole story about Abraham. I'm only going to read two verses, Genesis 12:1 and 2. Now the Lord has said to Abram, remember his name was Abram first before he became Abraham, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I use this Bible verse a lot when I'm teaching you because I really want you guys to get this. He says, get out of what you're comfortable and go to a land I'm gonna show you. In other words, I'm not telling you where you're going. You just got to trust me step by step. He didn't say go down the street. He said go to a land I'm going to show you. So in other words, he said get moving. I'm going to show you along the way. So that's a whole level of trust. The same way that Elisha said to the woman with oil, listen, gather all your vessels and then go get some from the neighbors, get empty ones, and take that little bit of oil you have and pour it. Now, if I had this much oil in my and God said go grab a whole bunch of water bottles, and fill them. I'm like, but it's only this much water in here, Lord. How am I going to fill it? That requires a level of faith, a level of trust. The fourth thing I need you to get is it also requires a sacrifice. So listen, the woman thought she was going to take this little bit of oil, the little bit she had left, and live on that and probably die. So when he said go gather vessels, she had to sacrifice what she already had to go and do this thing that Elisha, her coach, was telling her to do. So I need you to get this. Sacrifice is sacrificing something important or precious for the sake of gaining something. You get this? Or allowing something to happen. So many of you, the reason your business won't grow is because you're not willing to make a sacrifice. I know for me, there's three things I had to learn. Now, first of all, in the examples I gave you, Beyonce practicing every day at 9 years old, she had to sacrifice what? A whole lot of time that she could have been at summer camp. She could have been playing and riding bikes with her friends. She wasn't doing any of that. Even Oprah and watching her trajectory and all the things she had to go through to get there. Or Michelle Obama graduating from Harvard. You think she didn't have to sacrifice something? Even Tyler Perry, who produced his first play, living in a car. And there's a whole lot of things he sacrificed. And so in my journey, now I didn't have to live in a car by the grace of God, but I realized I had to sacrifice my time. I started getting up at 4 a.m. when I started doing this thing because, listen, I had a full-time job. I was an adjunct professor at two schools. I had just gotten married. I had bonus children. So I was trying to be the great bonus mom and getting them, making people breakfast and making lunches when they would go off to school and or summer camp. So in order for me to have the time that I needed to work on my business, I would get up at 4 a.m. Did I like it? No, I never liked it. It would be so hard to get up. But I was willing to sacrifice a little bit of sleep so I could do this thing and do the work to grow it. I wouldn't be where I am now had I not sacrificed that time. The other thing I had to sacrifice was sleep. I kind of said that, right? But the third thing I realized I had to sacrifice money. So we'll dig into this even more in part two. But here's what I began to realize is that if I'm going to do this thing, I have to stop relying on other people's money to do it. See, God gives each of us an opportunity to make money. It's called a job. I started calling my job an investor. I started looking at how can I take the investment funds I get every paycheck, pay my bills, and what do I not need? That's when I took my fingernails off. I used to get my fingernails done every other week. I now wear naturals because I got used to it. That's when I stopped getting my perm. Hello, hello, natural hair. Didn't even know my natural hair was going to be cute. I started looking at what can I let go of and not pay for? What's not a necessity? So I could use that extra money to go into my business. And because I made those sacrifices, time, looking at how I've spent my money, and really sacrificing every way I could. My question to you is what are you sacrificing to leverage your gift and grow it in a new and different way? I knew that I had to spend more time and I had to spend more money. And listen, you don't reap where you don't sow. And my business didn't grow for years because I wasn't sowing into it the right things. Listen, I had a whole free notebook, y'all. Whole free notebook. I hadn't hired a coach. It wasn't until I spent $30,000 to hire a coach. Expensive, yes. But you get what you give. I realized I had to invest at the level I wanted to see the return. That investment, a $30,000 investment, I did everything my coach told me to do. I went from, listen, I was making $13,000 at the time of my business. I'm from 13,000 to over 200,000 because I was willing to sacrifice my time. I was willing to sacrifice a little bit of sleep. I was willing to sacrifice what I didn't need in my budget, and I made my budget really, really lean so I could do the things I needed to do. And most of that budget sacrifice was before I met my husband. So many people say, well, you're married. No, but listen, I started my business when I was single, having to pay rent, having to pay lights, all those things, and looking at what can I let go of to make it happen. I started inviting my girlfriends over to dinner and making dinner, started going out to dinner. I did all kind of things so that I could have the extra cash I needed to do this thing that I know I'm called to do. What are you willing to do to make it happen? And stop making every excuse why now's not your time, why you don't have time, or why you don't have the money in your budget, or why and why and why and why. When God is not looking at your bank account, He's not looking at your schedule, He's not looking at your resume, He's checking your faith. What will you do with what I've given to you? How will you leverage to grow? And so those are the first four steps. I'm going to walk you through the next four in part two of our conversation. But before we walk through that, I want you to get that so many people want to do all this stuff in comfort. They want it to be easy. The reason why there are few Oprahs and few Tyler Perrys and few Steve Harveys and few, you name anybody you greatly admire, even if I say Steve Jobs, who started Amazon in his garage. Even Kentucky Fried Chicken. Do you realize that Kentucky Fried Chicken didn't start till he was 60? And he made his chicken, it was at a gas station. So people that stopped to get gas would get a piece of chicken. That's how he started. So any excuse you have as to why now is not your time, think about Kentucky Fried Chicken. Think about Steve Jobs. Think about Tyler Perry. I don't want to live in a car. I'm thanking God that didn't have to be my sacrifice. Let me keep it real. However, if what if it did? Even Tiffany Haddish had to live in her car. What are you willing to do to leverage your gift and grow it 10% more? Not one time. This is not a one time thing. But again, we'll dig more into this in part two. So I want you to really think about how are you leveraging your gift right now? I want you to look at how are you doing something different or something you've never done before? How are you do an environment check and see who's around you pouring in or taking away. I want you to really look at how do you need to increase your faith? The more time you spend with God, the more you increase your faith, by the way. And then what sacrifices do you need to make? And those are only the first four steps. So many of you know that we continue our conversation, part two, in Clubhouse on Tuesday mornings at 8:30 a.m. EST. The thing I love about Clubhouse is I can actually hear you. So come on over tomorrow morning, bring your questions. I'm happy to answer your questions. I'm happy to hear where you've been looking at how to leverage your gifts. I'm happy to coach you around it as well. Tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. EST. I usually share for the first 15 minutes. Some of Yolanda and a couple of our other clients and team come on and share, and then I want to hear from you. Okay. Now, those of you that know, like you need support with this, I also have a gift for you. So, in the last few weeks, my team and I have created what we call the BMA Roadmap. Now, if you've ever been around me, you know that the one thing I know from my own journey is that in order for you to truly grow your gift, you've got to have a clear A to B strategy. And most people don't give you an A to B strategy. They give you A and they give you maybe A point two, point three, maybe point four, but they don't walk you through all the steps. I should say A to Z actually. So that you understand how to leverage your purpose the right way, dominating your lane. And then there's three other systems you need around it. And so if that's you and you know you're ready to start your business, grab my free template. It's a BMA roadmap. And then I walk you through what the template is, free little training. All right. So with that said, that's it for this part one. I want to thank you for coming on in. And I want to say, hey, I see you, Janice and Etta and Kim. And I know there's more here. So say hello. The other thing I'm going to ask you to do is share the one thing you got valuable out of this part one. And the reason I ask you that is because I want to hear from you because I really do look at your insight. I really do look at how you are sharing and how you're learning and how you are growing from what I share. Because ultimately, I'm not here for me, I'm here for you. And so the more I can help you and bless you and pour into you, the better. Hey, my Yolanda, all right? So with that said, I will see you tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. EST for part two of this conversation. And again, share your value, all right? Bye, y'all. Thank you for joining us for this episode of FPP Live. Bye, y'all.